All right. We want to welcome all of Tobago to tonight's program. And tonight, just want to end off the year in the year in a way that is befitting to bring in the new one, and that is on a reflective note. All right. Um, we had some good happenings over the past week and a half or so, the past week since I saw you last. Um, the botanical gardens. It still continues, and Tobagonians have been going out in their numbers and participating and really giving the support and just having a good time amongst the botanical gardens. The festivities there, I myself went last week, and it was really beautiful to see the lights back in the gardens. And they had storytelling, and T-Pac was there doing improv acting and all of that. It was really wonderful. And also we had over the past week or so, we had Woody Maya coming through Tobago and really being wowed and impressed with what we had to offer on this small island, coming from a giant continent such as Africa, and been through the length and breadth of Africa and other countries. He was wowed to see that our culture, the beauty that we had to offer, and all of that. It was just, it was interesting to see that perspective coming out from his camp. And I hope he comes back in the future so that he could continue, because I'm pretty sure he couldn't hope to go through all we had to offer in just the short time that he was here. But I hope he is able to come back some other time and we show him the rest of what we have to offer. you know. Um, and last week we would have completed, uh, for anybody who's not joining or joining the program for the first time. Last week we were giving a halfway mark review, you could say, to the current administration. Um, 2 years in, right? So you could say it's the midterm examination, basically, right? So 2 years into their term, a 4-year term. Um, Usually when we were in secondary school or primary school, even university, we had the midterm tests. We had the midterm examination where the teachers would give us the examination just to test where we're going, for us to understand if we need help or we need other direction for us to course correct before the end of the term, which when we assess at the end of the term, that one is very, very important and much more important. So we must do our mid-term assessment, and that is what we have been doing on this program, and by extension, the television station. We have been calling persons in, getting their perspective on from far and wide, whether it be political analysts, representative of the both parties, or whatever. We were bringing them in to get what their perspective was on how the current administration, the current iteration of the administration, has been performing over the past 2 years. All right, and so tonight we want to continue with that, right? For the last installment of our program for 2023, we want to continue with that. All right. Last week we would have had three panelists on. This week we want to invite back on one of the panelists from last week as well to continue the conversation. All right. So we have joining us virtually tonight, Mr. Leroy George. Leroy, you with us tonight?
Yes, sir, I'm right here.
All right. Good to see you in the leaves there, man.
Yes,
You're amongst the leaves tonight.
yes, definitely. I believe we have Mr. Winston Pereira with us also tonight.
Okay, Mr. Winston is with us also. Right.
Hi,
Welcome,
hi.
Mr.
Y'all,
Winston.
yeah, y'all hearing me clearly?
I'm hearing you clearly.
We're hearing you.
Right,
And to
good.
introduce Mr. Winston Pereira, he is the chairman of the Boko Village Council.
No. Hold up. I'm not the chairman of
He's
What?
not the
Buko Village
chairman?
Council. No. That's not
That-
how it's structured. I'm the vice president of the Buko Village Council. But
Vice
that's
president.
that's aside from being a businessman and owning in the tourism industry.
Yes, I know that
And
you have been
a citizen, of course, of Tobago, Trinidad and
right,
Tobago, by example. Okay.
right. I'm familiar
So,
with you with your business exploits right there on the shores of Boko there.
I like how you
But
all use
I,
words,
I
exploits.
I
Okay.
stand
Go
corrected
ahead.
on the chairman. My apologies for that. Right, so
Right.
vice president of the Boko Village Council.
Right, but I'm speaking as an individual here tonight, just so we're clear, right? I'm not speaking
Okay,
on behalf of any organization, okay?
okay, no problem.
Right, and I
All
was
right.
invited by Leroy because we have discussions, and
Yes.
I guess I'm the only standing he could have found in short notice, so I'll try my best to keep up with you guys. Go ahead.
It's not about keeping up. We're just having a candid discussion. That's all it is.
I understand. I'm just making it clear, a disclaimer. Go ahead.
All right, no problem. All right, great. So last week we would, and I will give Mr. Pereira his chance to answer that question. Leroy would have already answered. But last week we would have talked on we would have touched on certain aspects of Tobago's economy, certain sectors, and we was giving letter grades on the administration performance on each sector. All right. Last week we touched on infrastructure, we touched on economics as well, and I think we just give a general performance grade, right? So I started off last week by asking the panel if you were to give a letter grade from E to F. You could do plus and minus in there if you so please. On the administration
Okay.
performance over the last 2 years, what would
Okay.
your letter grade be? Mr. Pereira, sorry.
Yeah, I know that question is for me. I know that question is for me. And I have to be very careful as to how I answer it because it has to be a measured answer, taking everything into consideration. The fact that this is a relatively new team to governance, and governance, as we all know, is not easy, right? From a performance perspective, if you do a comparative to the previous administration, I would say lower degree C, C minus. And that's only based on the realities that they face within the space, right? Because we all have to take into consideration that we still have a legislative component that acts as a obstacle to doing more.
Right.
See?
Right.
Am I correct? Would you all agree with that? Generally?
Well,
It's a general
I would. I
statement.
don't know if Leroy would agree with you, but I would.
You
Leroy would
wouldn't
have
agree
his
with me,
his,
Mr.
his thoughts
Moderator?
about that, I'm sure.
No, I mean, we all know about the different iterations of the Tobago House of Assembly Act, right? And we all know it's led up to this point, right? So in terms of governance, it's all directly connected to the ability for an island or a people to determine their destiny or their way forward, or be allowed to, or give some latitude to that occurring. You know what I mean? So from that perspective, there's limitations. But again, one could point to the fact that before the previous administration had left, there was a movement towards an autonomy bill, which would have allowed Tobago more access to funding. And the first thing you must always look at, and I heard somebody making that same point, I don't know who it was specifically, but it had to do with financial empowerment. Martin George made that point this morning. I think it was on a different channel, could be on this channel, where it's even though autonomy is necessary, but we must have financial empowerment. You know, when one becomes financially empowered and enabled, autonomy is automatic. It's not forced. It's just automatic, because then you have a greater leverage point. You understand what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, from that perspective, that's how I would view it, and that's why I would give them a C minus, because I'm not here to batter anyone.
Right.
You understand? When you have 60,000 people on this island,
True.
it's pointless creating any kind of division with 60,000 people. What we can do is contribute. What we can do is talk. What we can do is have a diversity of ideas coming to the forefront, and you filter and you move forward accordingly.
Right. Leroy, you have anything to add to what Mr. Pereira just said? Or anything to see?
Well, I understand Mr. Pereira's position, which is that he gives them a C minus based on the fact that there are some restraints that are tied to autonomy. But as you would remember, I gave them an F based on measurables, even though I did state that I feel as though had the measurables that should have existed where the Tobago Carnival is concerned, they may have scored slightly better, probably in the vicinity of a D or D minus. However, because as I would have stated the last time, I'm a strong supporter of the idea of the second Carnival of Tobago having its standalone carnival. And so I was very pleased with that. It's not to say that the carnival was perfect, but the idea was, in my opinion, a perfect idea. And the execution was definitely a passing execution. However, when I look at the measurables, such as the fact that our economy shrunk by 2%, so we had a minus 2% economic growth rate in the last year or so, and we know that the definition of a recession is having two consecutive quarters of economic down growth. So we entire of growth had to be in a recession, and as a result, I cannot give a passing grade to a government that would have received Tobago not in a. As a matter of fact, it was just coming out of the COVID-19 restrictions where the entire earth saw a minus 3% growth rate, and still, despite that, they were not able to do better than even Tobago at that low point, whereby, and we know this because Trinidad would have seen double digits, the last time I checked, double digit positive growth, while Tobago got negative growth. And so I cannot give them a passing grade where that is concerned. I do agree also with Mr. Winston Pereira that the issues that this THA administration is facing, many of these issues are tied to autonomy, right? It is a fact that they did not make the smartest choices where finance is concerned, most specifically when it comes to giving contracts to persons in UNC-controlled areas of Trinidad for jobs that would usually be done by Tobago contractors, etc. We saw that the largest decline happened in the construction industry, a decline of 36%, I think Mr. Charles Smith quoted, and I heard a figure in the mid-30s also, so I could concede that that figure is correct. It is true that they made some mistakes. However, if we were to get some financial autonomy over our own resources, etc., the mistakes that they made may not have been so crippling. And I don't know if crippling is a fair word. Let me use a more embarrassing. Embarrassing is a better word. The mistakes they would have made may not have been so embarrassing had we had some more autonomy. And if I'm looking at autonomy, I would have to give them a failing grade where that is concerned also, because they would have campaigned, this particular administration would have campaigned heavily on autonomy, in pursuing autonomy. And we see that there are a couple of bills floating around, one by the Joint Select Committee, which was rejected. As a matter of fact, the now Chief Secretary, back then Assemblyman, and many of the persons in his administration today would have had a reject the bill campaign, which I definitely am against, because had those two bills been amended slightly and there was a lot of capability, for want of a better terminology, or there was a lot of opportunity rather to amend those bills and have them passed, Tobago would have been dealing with around a $4 billion budget versus a $2.5 billion budget. And so for them to reject that when they were not in power, I think it showed a lack of foresight. And also, when you have the Joint Select Committee having a bill, you had Mr. Orville London with much consultation in the way that it's supposed to be done, making a bill also. You have, I think even the UNC in times past would have put together a bill or had started such a process. And to see that this administration, which campaigned so heavily on the autonomy, has not even made the beginnings of an attempt, be it consultation, much less putting together an entire bill to present to the parliament, it shows that as soon as they got into office, they changed plans. They made a 180 on us. And as a result, that has to be a failing grade, because above all things, these individuals are employees of us, the taxpayers of Tobago, in particular the residents of Tobago. And as employees, whenever you get a job, your employer asks you what you intend to do. Your employer tells you what he or she wants you to do. You agree to do it. And if you go in there and you do something otherwise, then there is no other grade other than an F. And the one last thing I would say though, when it comes to autonomy, I'm pleased that we have Mr. Winston with us, because as a businessman, I think that the private sector would have a lot to say in terms of the direction we should be going and the discussion we should be having. But that's for later on, possibly.
Right. I want to make some development. Well, obviously, we're going into. I want to go into where Mr. Pereira is qualified again, but not necessarily business, but in a wider perspective, tourism and culture. So over the last 2 years, we have seen the administration. There have been a lot of efforts, and I have noticed it, and I myself want to commend it as Leroy commended it. There have been a lot of efforts where tourism and culture is concerned, in terms of I would like to see the sheer effort and importance they place on certain festivals. Not necessarily the bigger ones like the jazz and stuff, but even like the smaller ones, the heritage, blue food, and
Right.
even some like, well, I know the goat race and stuff only just came back. They tried to continue it last year, and then this year I believe the Boko Village Council continued it on from this year. All right, but
Well, they did it last year.
let's agree for tourism and cultural offerings. What do you think, Mr. Pereira? Would you rate the current administration, and obviously you will explain what's the reason for your grading?
Okay, so 2 questions there. How I'd rate them, and what's the reason I would give for rating them. Okay, and the situation is quite. How can I say? The situation is one where there's a kind of gray area, because when the pandemic was occurring, it was a complete lockdown. Now, prior to that actually happening, the numbers, international arrivals, were already down, were relatively low. Okay, during the pandemic, it became zero. Also, there was an impact in terms of the domestic market, right, on that. As soon as the restrictions were lifted, we recognize influx, a massive influx of the domestic market returning, but returning in larger numbers with more consistency straight across the year. So the numbers would have reflected that. Okay. Now, going into this 23-24 season, you've seen a return of Condor, which will bolster the numbers, at least from the European side, right? You still have one direct, coming to Gateway, London, Heathrow, Gatwick. I could be wrong. I think Gatwick. You'll have British Airways. The problem lies in the fact that there is no other alternative to BA on that route. So that will create a kind of monopoly occurring. When I say monopoly, in terms of cost for the traveler to get down here. Now, the English traveler will be even more impacted because the value of the pound has gone down considerably. So it's more expensive for them to travel.
Right.
Okay? So what I'm really getting at is we really have to align our product for what it really is and who it appeals to. You understand? If we are creating a strategy moving forward, I know for a fact the TTL had undertaken a customer service training program, which we've always had problems with customer service in this industry and complaints and stuff like that. It's a major part.
Right.
Also, the improvements or the identifying of blue flag sites and using the blue flag for like the normal activities like the reef tours and stuff, which uplifts the visibility of the destination and appeals to a specific crowd. The thing about it is that we really have to focus on niche tourism, right? We can't compete with Barbados, with Antigua. It's just impossible. The numbers that they rack up in Jamaica, we can't do it. But we do have out there in the ether, aside from the domestic market and a continuing supportive mechanism of the domestic market through events and stuff like that, there is an international market that will support us. We have a history of certain markets, certain source markets, the Scandinavian market, the Italian market, that have been consistently with us. It has dropped off and declined, granted, but those are things we should engage in. We should try to reconnect with these markets, right? Because where we are at, okay, from let's say a hotel, for let's say critical mass required to draw airlift. If you're looking at it from the actual from the de facto formula, the high-end accommodation that would be required to draw that kind of airlift does not exist in Tobago. But Tobago has accommodation of relatively good standard.
Right.
Okay. And then we also have to look at the community-based oriented tourism as an approach.
Yes.
Part of our ask, to identify the markets that would support that type of experiential thing.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So the question is, what grade would I give them, and what is the reason for that? The grade, I would definitely we have to look at everything in context. Okay, the decisions made, it might not bear fruit now, but going forward it will.
Right.
I think one of the major mistakes that they did make earlier was to do away with the Virgin flight. As much as they talk about return on investment, I understood that. I think negotiations they should have engaged Virgin more vigorously. All right, more vigorously, because the idea really in business is to get leverage. So sometimes you have to eat the bullet to gain strength, just like the Chinese model. You know what I mean? The Chinese were known, cheap labor. America started to pump outsource everything to them. And all of a sudden now, the manufacturing base of the world is China. They have leverage. They could dictate the pace. And I think if we take that kind of approach and we add more value to what we have and we consider the value of what we are offering, I think we'll be better off. I think we will be going somewhere. We only have 60,000 people here, not even a small company.
Doesn't take much.
You know what I mean? We could do this. We could do this, but we need everybody coming together on the table. And we have to stop thinking, I know politics is part of our culture and stuff like that. Right? But the pause that we have to also recognize, as with like even in corporate governance, the shareholder, the people they are accountable to are the people who elected them. right? And with that in the forefront, I think the decisions would be much more, measured, much more thought out, and would have a more collective positive impact on 60,000 people. That's all. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
If you hit 80%, you do well. How much is 80% of 60,000?
Right.
Think about it. So yeah. So the grade, C minus again.
C minus again. No problem.
Yeah, C minus again. And the reason I just gave you all the
Yeah,
reasons.
yeah, you did. You did.
Right? So
Yeah.
that's me.
Leroy, tourism and cultural offerings. What grade would you give this current administration? You already started by giving them good commendations for the carnival. So along those lines.
Right. Well, I would admit that I have some idea as to what numbers Carnival usually brings in. Right? I'm disappointed in the division of tourism. I'm disappointed in THA in that they did not do what is done every single year where our national carnival is concerned, where the Ministry of National Security goes and they actually do a survey to find out how many persons would have visited Trinidad and Tobago specifically for carnival, and then under the data find out how much on average they spend, and then according to that they're able to tell that every year Trinidad and Tobago makes it just over $300 million, etc. Instead, what we saw where the carnival is concerned, we saw, and I made mention of this, so I don't want to dwell on it because it's a negative and there are other positives that I could make mention of. What we saw is that the Secretary for Tourism would have simply copy and pasted those same figures and made a statement that Tobago made 300 million, not taking into consideration that Trinidad and Tobago government spends $140 million towards the Trinidad and Tobago product, and that's what brings in that 300 million. Whilst here with the Tobago product, we're only looking at 12 to 14 million dollars. And historically speaking, out of that 140 million or so, about 10 million, that's before we had our standalone carnival, would be spent specifically on the Tobago part carnival product, and we would make something in the vicinity of about 14 million if the figures, I remember those figures correctly. Of course, I know these figures because the very first project that I worked on when I was the research officer in the Office of the Minority Leader was basically towards where the then the still political leader of the PDP, Mr. Watson Solomon Duke, passed the motion that to be a standalone carnival, which is the genesis of what we're seeing today. And instead, she didn't take those numbers, and she didn't have that survey. The Division of Tourism have that survey, and they weren't able to bring those numbers to us. And I think she's probably a bit embarrassed that she got the figures so badly off. But I think sometimes you really need to just put away your ego as an individual when you're a public servant to the level of being an elected representative and a secretary in the Tobago House of Assembly, because those numbers are really important. So if I was to grade based on measurables, I'd have to give FO ungraded. However, because I know the figures, I'm going to go ahead and say where that part is concerned, you know what, I'm going to give them a whole A minus, right? The only reason there's going to be a minus is because I don't like the fact that we had a standalone carnival, we had an opportunity whereby the providers of goods and services pertaining to carnival could have benefited heavily from it. Instead, they choose to import goods and services from Trinidad when and where it may not have been necessary. However,
Right.
for the second carnival, I must say that I saw an improvement in how they treated the local persons, the music. One of the things I couldn't stand about the first carnival is that we had a carnival, yes, it was great, but what was the hot song? There was no answer to that question. Now somebody asks you, what is the hot song this carnival? Everybody knows Come Here by Mr. Nom Nom. Everybody know that
Over
answer.
here.
They know that the guy from Rock Pro, yes, the guy from
Okay,
Rock
so-
Pro was a close second And so that was a move in the right direction, and that's why I give them a A minus, right?
Okay, so
However, there are other things. When it comes to niche market, I agree a lot with Mr. Winston Pereira. As the founder of Green Tobago Tours, I observe certain things because my income comes in heavily as a result of tourism also. And Tobago could benefit from niche market. Remember, we have an island next to us that has 20 times as much persons as us, right? And it's so much cheaper to vacation in Tobago than anywhere else. And so to reach out to Trinidad is a wise thing also. I've also noticed that they're like German tourists. The Secretary of Tourism pointed out that in the first year, if it was, there was an increase in German visitors, an exponentially larger increase than the year before. And that doesn't surprise me at all, because Germans do appreciate the product that Tobago has. We saw Woudemeyer came and his reviews were, it was just over the ceiling, it was in the sky, and so we could see that the West African market would definitely appreciate our product. Not just Woudemeyer, we know the entire West African market, because if you look at the comment sections, if you look at the views, everything, you could see that all those persons from Africa that saw, they were impressed. And I am optimistic that we'll see more persons coming in from there. What I'm not interested in is us trying to compete, as Mr. Winston pointed out, try to compete with the rest of the Caribbean for international markets that are already heading in their direction. I look at cricket a lot. It amazes me that when you watch a game in Barbados, you would see more British tourists in the stands than even local persons, etc. So I don't see the reason why we should be fighting for those markets that the other Caribbean islands already have a head start on us. And they, quite frankly, they have a culture. I would not consider the culture to be superior to us at all, because I've been to Barbados and I feel as though when it comes to Barbados, because Barbados is the only place I've been to for any lengthy period of time in the Caribbean, they have a kind of subservient kind of attitude towards European, etc. And we don't have that in Tobago. I'm not interested in Tobago. And our German guests, I could tell you for sure, our German guests are not interested in seeing us readjust ourselves accordingly. And so community tourism, which Castara, in my opinion, has mastered, is the appropriate way for the people of Tobago. And so the one thing I was disappointed with is when I heard the Chief Secretary talking about bringing in a private equity-owned all-inclusive resort, Appalachia, controlled by Appalachia, to Killigwin, to destroy the mangrove forest, etc., to put a hotel there. I see that it hasn't happened yet. I don't know what stage of progress they're in that direction, but that is definitely not the appropriate direction for Tobago. We are also superior to the competition when it comes to environment. Remember, we have the largest reef of its kind in the Western Hemisphere. Remember, we have the oldest protected rainforest. Clean, green, serene, and environmentally friendly. That is the Tobago product. Come to Tobago, get treated like a Tobagonian. That's what people appreciate about Tobago. There is no need to try to reinvent the wheel, even though I do recognize that when it comes to customer service, there is some need for, you know, the basics of good customer service to be improved.
Right. Mr. Pereira, you had something to add, though?
Well, sorry. What I was going to ask Leroy, right? He said he graded them what? A minus? Right. So are you
with the Carnival? Carnival is A minus. The overall tourism product, I would say I'd give them a C. Overall tourism product, because there were some negatives, but the Carnival, I'll give it an A minus.
Okay. Why would you give it an A minus? I mean, I'm just asking because I want to know exactly where your mind is at and how you're grading it. Because, I mean, all right, fine. They had a turnout for it, but you know, one metric that one uses in tourism to determine how well something is or from a fiscal perspective, from a return on investment, one will look at the median spend of the individual coming. Okay, what I've noted with the carnival, not in all cases, but you have individuals who will come just for the day, play, and go back up. So the spend is limited to that period of time. Okay, whereas the actual festival is supposed to be for 3 days. Now you do see an increase in terms of bookings, in terms of occupancy and stuff like that, and that is always welcome. But again, it's a standalone period in an entire month. So when you do an average occupancy, you'll see like 39, 35%. You know? Now, break even is 25, 10% above that is pretty good for small properties. But what we need is a sustainability catalyst, something that consistently brings in the numbers and in turn also allows for that median spend to occur within the community. You follow me? Now, you spoke about ABC Leisure thing. They are an international brand. They're the ones who operate Dreams Resorts in Santo Domingo and all over the Caribbean. Let me make something clear to you. I do not think any of these large brands would really put themselves at a risk to say they're going to destroy any environmental component of any island because it would look bad. Their brand is everything. That's their value. That's the worth. I remember a person who I looked up, I used to speak to, and he was a big hotelier and stuff like that. And he told me one day, he said, "Boss, the only way you can make money here is when you sell your property in, because the job you're in. Yeah, we get a return it, we live pretty right, and we have to make the right decisions. But the whole idea of the industry is service. That connection that comes through that service giving, that's the value there, at least for me. You know what I mean? Everything else is a blessing from God, but that's what I'm saying. So there's a consistency component to that. So you have the service and then you have the consistency. So automatically you build that clientele. And as you build that clientele, because you have the mediums now of social media and stuff, you push that word out there. You push. So it kicks over. It keeps running. So you have more. You have more of a reach. You understand? Where we have a problem is getting the people here effectively and efficiently. KLM is the sideline airline right now that supports the Tobago product through that European market. We require to get one more airlift in. And also, Leroy, you were kind of up in arms with the airport project, but that is an important component to the overall development of the industry. Okay, think about it. Think about the potential that brings to Tobago, not only from the direct investment, but from the spin-off activities that occur, the employment that will occur, and the opportunity to engage larger airlines to the island. So we really have to. I understand, because the patrimony of Tobago is important to anyone who really cares about Tobago. I being one, for sure. You understand? I believe when we are negotiating, we must know where our leverage points are. And we have to be able to leverage that as effectively and efficiently as we can. Right? So that's my view. Yeah?
All right. What
If I
one
may
of the
respond, please.
as Leroy said earlier in the
I'm
conversation,
not attacking you. I'm not attacking you. I'm just giving you a viewpoint,
Yes,
No.
and it's welcome.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I'm not attacking you.
Very much so.
Right.
Very much so.
Leroy would have alluded to earlier in the conversation about the relations, and I want to call it domestic relations. When they call it international relations or foreign policy, let's talk about domestic policy. So I'm speaking now about the relationship between Tobago and Trinidad, and it needs and how that is managed or actively managed, because it is something that is supposed to be managed. I think we took it. That is something that we took. That we didn't. Let me just say we took it for granted. It's something that we didn't really think about when we had the two administrations, PNM in Trinidad, PNM in Tobago, and they more so governed without having much hiccups in between the two administrations, that between THA and central government, because it was the same party governing the two. But now now that we have a different administration in Tobago, now we're seeing kind of the importance of domestic policy, or I would call it domestic relations, between our local government here, which is THA, and the central government of Trinidad and Tobago. All right. So over the past 2 years, what would you say is the grade? What would you grade that relationship in between the THA and central government? I mean, there are a lot of things to consider. We have the Office of the Deputy Chief, which was tasked with that role and function specifically. And we have seen that in 2 years, we haven't seen anything coming out, anything substantial coming out of that division, right? So I'm going to start with Leroy. Relations between Tobago and Trinidad, what would you grade?
Right. I'm going to be frank and say F, right? Just as I said before, right? My overall grade is an F, right? Even though when it comes to tourism specifically, because of the carnival, they got I think I graded them a C with a A- specifically for the carnival. That to me is one of the few things that worked out well. However, when it comes to our relationship with Trinidad, I have to give them a resounding F. If there was a lower grade than F, I'd have to give it to them. And that ties into what Mr. Winston Pereira pointed out. Let me make something abundantly clear. I do not have a problem with the expansion of the airport, right? That is a good thing. However, if I was to wake up tomorrow morning and see somebody building something on my land, right, irrespective of, and they tell me, well, this is a great thing, it's a great business or whatever have you, the fact that it is my land that they're building on is always going to be the dominant issue. And the reality of the situation is, look at the 33 responsibilities that fall in Act 40 of 1996 under the THA or under, the Tobago Assembly. You see that infrastructure, and they were particular to mention air and seaports, falls under the Tobago House of Assembly. So the fact that the past administration, and I recognize that it was the past administration that abdicated that responsibility, and I see no good reason for them abdicating that responsibility, because the money that is being used to build that airport could have been sent to the THA, and that is the appropriate thing to happen. And the fact that we saw this THA administration at first, well, we didn't see the administration itself. We saw about 3/4 of the administration, not including the heads. At that time, you would have had Watson Solomon Duke as the deputy chief secretary, had Pali as chief secretary, Dr. Faith B. Israel. Those, in my opinion, based on my experiences, those were the heads. Were not a part of it, but they stood up against the fact that persons were being relocated from their homes without appropriate compensation, etc. But once the chief secretary and the rest of the administration met with China Railroad Construction, they made a complete 180-degree turn. And when Mr. Ho-Choi Charles would have basically required of them that they file an injunction based on the fact that that airport should have been built by THA, when they had an obligation to do so. Instead, we see they made a 180 and they turned against the people of Crown Point, allowing the people of Crown Point to be taken advantage of, and also continuing to abdicate their authority over the airport. And we all know that who pays the piper calls the tune. This abdication does not seem to me to be something that would be temporary, something that could find itself becoming permanent, even though on paper it would probably, for in perpetuity, fall under the responsibilities of the THA. That is what I have had a great problem with. And so that is one issue that I gave them a F with. They betrayed the people of Tobago there. also, if we're going to be having conflicts with Trinidad, let us be on the right side of the conflict. I've listened to the Chief Secretary's arguments as it pertains to the appointment of the Chief Administrator, and I've listened to the Prime Minister, and I have to say, it seems very clear to me that the Chief Secretary was in the wrong where that is concerned. So why pick an unnecessary fight? It is known that the Chief Secretary's responsibility is to inform the Prime Minister if there is any issues with the appointment of a Chief Administrator. And our Chief Secretary failed to inform the Prime Minister that they had an issue. And so, therefore, the appropriate thing Chief Secretary to do, because I believe they had an hour and a half worth of conversation, is to simply say, you know what, I was wrong, I forgot, let's move on. However, this person that is being presented as a potential Chief Administrator is inappropriate for whatever reason, and then we continue. But when you're wrong and strong, you're really putting us on the wrong footing. And we do not need to be on the wrong footing, because at the end of the day, we depend on the same government administration in Trinidad to decide whether or not to give us the 4.03% or something closer to that rather than the 6.9%. So we cannot be in the wrong. We also saw that the Chief Secretary was in the wrong again when it comes to the voice recording situation, voice note as they call it, Voicegate or voice note gate or something like that. He was in the wrong again, in that he would have brought Mr. Akil Abdullah into the conversation via video footage, etc. And Mr. Akil Abdullah would have said things about the Prime Minister, about the Commissioner of Police, etc. That later on we heard another voice recording where Mr. Akil Abdullah would have stated that the only reason he made those statements is because he was bullied. Somebody slapped him. And we heard Miss Ava McCall say that when she spoke to him on that same very day, Mr. Akil Abdullah would have stated that he was afraid because some car had pulled up close to his place and he felt as though it was Farley people, etc. Now, we know that Akil Abdullah is not the most reliable of sources where information is concerned. However, because the Chief Secretary would have been working with Mr. Akil Abdullah as a member of the Executive Council of the PDP, Mr. Chief Secretary, he should have had more wisdom than to make such a desperate move so as to present Mr. Akil Abdullah, and the Prime Minister was greatly offended because Trinidad and Tobago is to host a major international event very soon, and having those accusations posed against him, it really puts not him alone in a negative light, but also Trinidad and Tobago in a negative light. And so again, I would urge the Chief Secretary, please apologize when you are wrong. You do not represent yourself, you don't represent all the 60 how much thousands persons of Tobago. And so when you are wrong, whatever consequences are going to come to us, it's not going to come to you alone, it's going to come to the people of Tobago. And so generally speaking, and again, they have done not autonomy to really push that situation right there, which could solve a large percentage of our problems. And so I'd have to say that I give them a solid F when it comes to their relations with Trinidad. And the last thing, we've been beating this horse, but it needs to be beaten. You do not send money outside of Tobago when it is unnecessary. I see a couple supporters of this administration saying, oh, that we criticize this administration for sending contracts to UNC-controlled areas of Trinidad that should have gone to Tobagonians. But you also see Tobagonians, civilians, going down to Trinidad for shopping. Let me remind such persons that those persons, those Tobagonians that are going to Trinidad for shopping, to shop, they are going to Trinidad so that they could gain goods and services at a cheaper price. When the THA administration went to Trinidad to offer those road contracts that would otherwise go to Tobago contractors, to these persons, they paid over 60% more than what the Tobago contractors were paying. And so one could say that one action was born out of necessity and the other action was born out of something. I cannot find a politically correct word for stupidity, but there is no, but it was not wise. It was wise, it was otherwise rather than wise.
All
And so
right.
they get a solid F where
Let me
that
give
is concerned.
Mr. Pereira in.
Right. Right. So the question is the relationship between Trinidad and Tobago
Yes.
in terms of its political relationship.
Yes. Governance
Yeah.
as well. Yeah.
And the governance.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Well, so you know that the THA themselves are a sub-institution of central government,
Yes.
right? Because the only strength they have is administrative.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So obviously, I mean, it's two different parties in charge. You know, you have the mid-level managers, and then you have the upper executive board and stuff like that. So there's a pull and tug between each, and most of it is based on politics. It ends up leaning towards that. You know, Leroy would have recounted various things that we have heard in the space, you know, with voice notes and individuals jumping ship and of course the usurping of Watson Solomon's Duke as the leader, well, not the leader of the PDP, but as the DCS, and his role in the present administration's leadership.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, people could look at it from various angles. Okay, and there were various reasons given and assumptions and stuff like that. So from a political standpoint, yeah, I would say the relationship, I would grade it as an F. And that's primarily because it's politics. You know, it's politics. You understand? Again, my good friend Leroy would have a lot of stats in front of him, and he's spouting off the top of his head. I mean, I can't challenge. I wouldn't challenge it in any way. Obviously, what I can say as a businessman, from what I'm hearing within the business community, is that the economy has slowed down considerably. There is no actual activity occurring, and again, that has to do with the central provider being the Tobago House of Assembly, catalyst behind it. Okay, so Leroy pointed out the move away of the developmental income into the hands outside of Tobago, right? For whatever reason, we don't know up to now. I mean, you could make all kind of assumptions, right? But again, that did not help us in any way, right? You're hearing about this one accusing that one of the other, and this one accusing that one of the other, which friction was created because, you know, I mean, come on, you had a sitting administration, incumbent administration for how long? 20-something years? 20, be correct, 21 years. I have a party that came about in 2017. Am I correct?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, am I correct? I just want to make sure that I'm saying the correct things because we're on air.
You will tell you if you're wrong.
It's upstart party, and they come and they move a major player like the PNM out of the space. Now, I mean, if I'm in the executive of the PNM, or if I'm one of the elected officials of the PNM, I would feel a way about that. You understand? Because I always remember saying, the Minister of Energy under Chambers, Mahabir, I think was his name, Aaron Mahabir, he says any incumbent party that has the power of the state behind them, the medium of the state, and they lose the election, have no right to be the incumbent party. And that's a very straightforward statement. In other words, there was a disconnect that occurred, and for some reason the former administration was not aware of it until it was too late. Mm-hmm. You understand? And the people fell away with the comfort that they had, you know, the connection that they felt with the party, and moved away from that perspective and looked towards supposedly greener pastures that were being you know, offered by the other party. Mm-hmm. Right? Now, at the end of the day, The voter looking at bread and butter issues. How I send my children to school. How I put food on the table. How am I going to pay my car note? How am I going to pay my bank mortgage? These are things that are important to individuals, the persons, the families, the health sector, all those things. Those component parts have to run hand in hand with the demands of the population you're governing. Okay? The pandemic kind of exposed that house of cards. And it's not the PNM fault. Believe me, I'm not trying to accuse any politics. But when you have administration on an island employing 75% of the entire workforce, anything that shifts that paradigm, you're going to see a falling away of support for that party. Right? So it was the right place at the right time. And you have to give Mr. Duke some credit. You understand? Because people underestimated him, and he proved that they were wrong. Okay, what has happened since that point in time is a reflection of the brutal nature of where they were at that point in time. Right, the infighting. This one pulling so, that one pulling so. Somebody saying, "I don't think Watson has the right to go and speak for us because he's not as intelligent as, let's say, Faith Israel with her degrees and stuff." And I'm just using comparisons because you would hear that within the ranks. You understand? But loyalty does not have a degree. Okay? Loyalty does not have a degree. So they will have individuals in that party now saying to themselves, but look how disloyal these people are. You understand? And then you would have people in Tobago who we look to for advice, former leaders, who were basically supporting that move. And now they're the ones who are standing back and say, "Oh God, they treat me bad." Look, as I heard even Mr. James the other day, Max James coming out and saying they were arrogant. But I mean, that was obvious, wasn't it? You understand? But what I'm trying to say is simply this, right? That if you had the cards, you play them. You don't bluff. Okay? You can't have a fictional relationship, especially when you do not. You went against the autonomy bill. You went against it. That civil service problem, what Leroy just pointed out, that would have been settled right here, right in Tobago, right in the Tobago space through that bill. But you went against it, and now you're reaping the returns of that. And the fact that you have to be dependent, you're still dependent, on Trinidad for your sustenance. So you're like a paper tiger. And that'll be frustrating to anyone. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So from a relationship standpoint, F.
Right.
Cool. Yeah.
Okay. I definitely want to say thanks to everybody for giving their opinions, and obviously the opinions, I don't like to bash, as I will tell you and them, we do always bash, but we bring out some positives, bring out some negatives, so that we have a fair assessment of what the administration did well and what they can improve upon.
I think, can I just say one thing? I think, all right.
Mr. Winston saying something?
Yeah, I was just going to say something. I think one of the main positives is that people are more aware politically in the space now than they ever were before. A more informed public allows for more a greater discourse to occur and a more informed decision to make when you get that ballot box.
Right.
You understand? When you hit that ballot box, So that's a good thing. That's a good thing.
And programs like these
of course.
Obviously very instrumental in promoting that discourse to the public,
Yeah.
So yes,
I was just giving a shout out to Anton, what I mean, and all the rest of them, Nana, all of them,
Yes. Big up Anton, big up Nana.
Yeah.
Behind the scenes.
If I may lend some support to what Mr. Winston said, because it's so important. one of the most positive things that happened over the last 2 years is that we did become more politically literate in the Tobago space due to
Yeah.
all the political maneuvering that took place, etc. And that is super important for one reason. You see, culture is going to dictate the direction that we go as a nation, right? As a people, as Tobagonians, culture is going to dictate the direction. We're not looking that good. As Mr. Winston Pereira pointed out, ingratitude. The persons in the Trinidad space, they're looking at what happened in the Tobago space. They're seeing that theme of ingratitude, etc. We're seeing a situation where the chief secretary is not a reliable source of information when and where he needs to be. Sometimes he says things that are not true and he's not apologizing. We see even with the Voicegate, when he's speaking under, for want of a better terminology, party parliamentary privilege, he's claiming that, oh, the meeting where he made those utterances may have been a PDP meeting, but once he's not under parliamentary type privileges, all of a sudden it becomes a executive council meeting, and he's not giving any clarification where these things are concerned, and it makes the Begonians look bad. But worse than looking bad, it forces us to now have to look at ourselves and ask what happened to the morals that we had before. And these morals are going to become necessary if we want to bring solutions. The solutions is not going to come from party politics. It's not even going to come from the THA. And the reason why I say that, let's say the THA was to propose a autonomy bill. We know that their opponents are going to fight against it because they just don't want them to look good, just as they fought against the Joint Select Committee's autonomy bill because they didn't want the PNM to look good, just as the PNM fought against the UNC because they didn't want them to look good. So where this autonomy that would solve a lot of our problems is going to come from is when we, the people of Tobago, take the front in contrast to the politicians and say, this is what we want the union between Trinidad and Tobago to look like. This is where we want that to happen, but it's going to be difficult because just as Mr. Winston Pereira pointed out, it is highly abnormal to have a situation where 70-75% of the island is employed by the public sector. It does not speak well to democracy at all. These figures are figures that would usually happen in communist type nations, and we know in communist type nations, yes, there is some good that come from leftist type stuff because, you know, Norway is a socialist nation. Trinidad and Tobago, both the PNM and the UNC have some basis in some of their origins in socialism. I wouldn't go into all of that, etc. However, when it comes to human rights, etc., eventually you start to see a downgrading of that happening in these type of environments because everybody is getting their employment from the government, and so everybody is afraid to speak out against the government. And so we need persons like Mr. Winston Pereira, etc., who are in the private sector, myself also in the private sector, to really take the front and say, you know what, because we're in a position where we could speak not just out against them, but also for them when they are in the right, etc., because they need our support when they are in the right. We need such persons to stand up, but we're not going to have a large private sector until we, the people of Tobago, change the way we look at business persons. And I'm not talking about the big business persons, I'm talking about the small business person with the small business attitude, whereby if you don't have a government job, we treat you as though you're unemployed, even though you may be a small businessman making wine, etc., etc., etc. And as a result of that, you're going to have less persons wanting to become business persons. And once less persons want to become business persons, you're not going to have a situation where that unnatural 75% in the public sector starts shifting into the private sector. We need to start celebrating our small businessmen so that they are encouraged, and businesswomen also, so that they are encouraged to go on to become big business persons, even from the embryonic stages of their businesses. And that is one of the things I really appreciated about Mr. Wodemeyer. He really shined a light on a lot of the small business persons like Stacey Hubert, etc. And I think that is a trend that we probably should stay on if we want to have improvement, because until we improve as a people, I can tell you it would not matter who wins the next THA election, it will not matter who wins the next government election, you're going to keep having the same problems. And when we
Right.
do improve, it again will not matter who wins, because
Right.
the government will always dance to the beat of the drum that we are beating,
Right.
never to their own beat.
Right. All right. So on that note, I think that's a good note to wrap up this nice program on. I want to say thank you so much for joining us tonight, fellas, on such short notice. Obviously, things will always work out how we plan on TV, but again, we always have contingency plans. So I thank you so much for joining us, and thank you to Tobago for joining us as well and having this riveting discussion. So again, as I said earlier in the program, this probably would be, well, it is our last program for 2023. All right, and the year so far has been an up and down one, but I know that it has been a year of growth and learning for me on the show and in the program, but and I also see for the people as well in Tobago, we have been learning and growing as well. And so next year we plan to come back with the show to continue on and to improve and to do even bigger and better things, not only on the show but in Tobago Updates television as well. All right. But until next year, when I see you again, all right, I wish you all the best. Season's greetings for Christmas next week. I hope that you have a fun-filled Christmas with family and friends and laughter and joy and gratitude. Also, I wish you all the greatest blessings moving into 2024. But until I see you next year, God bless. God bless you. God bless Tobago. All right. And I wish you a happy new year for 2024. All right. So I bid you adieu. Tobagonians, remember, mind your business. All right. Good night.